I need my own space, Marcus. I think it would be best if you moved your things into the guest room. My name is Marcus Dillon. And I need you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this story. Those words were not said at the end of a fight. There was no screaming. No slamming doors. No build-up you could point to and say, there, that's where it broke. It was a Sunday evening. I was sitting on the edge of our bed taking off my shoes, the same bed I'd slept in for 6 years, and Diane walked in from the bathroom, stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, and said those words like she'd been rehearsing them. And here's the part one think most people overlook when they hear a story like this. It wasn't the words that hit me. It was her face. She didn't look angry. She didn't look guilty. She looked like a woman who had already made a decision days ago and was only now getting around to telling me. I looked at her for a long moment. I studied her face the way you study something when you're afraid it might be the last time. Then I said, all right. No argument. No, why are you doing this? No begging. I picked up one shoe. Then the other. Stood up. Walked out. I heard her exhale behind me, this long, slow breath, and I couldn't tell if it was relief or something else. I didn't turn around to find out. Because I had learned from watching my mother work double shifts alone for 29 years that the most dangerous thing a person can do when someone underestimates them, is let them see it land. I was already thinking about the hotel charge I'd seen on our bank statement 3 days before. I hadn't said anything yet. But I was listening. And I was counting. I moved every single one of my things out of our room the next morning, before Diane was even awake. And the look on her face when she realized it? That told me everything I needed to know. I want to be clear about something. I didn't do it to make a statement. I didn't do it to punish her. I did it because I was done living halfway anywhere. I grew up watching my mother do things completely, fully, even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. So when I decide something, I decide it all the way. I took my clothes. My watch box. The little framed photo of my mother I kept on my nightstand. My books. 3 quiet trips down the hall while the house was still sleeping. I organized everything in the guest room like a man who planned to stay a while, because I did. Shirts hung. Shoes in a row. Clean sheets on the bed. When Diane came downstairs at 7, I heard her footsteps slow near our bedroom door. Then stop. I was in the kitchen making coffee. I heard her push the door the rest of the way open. Heard the silence that followed. She came to the kitchen doorway. I didn't look up right away. I poured my cup. Stirred it. Then raised my eyes. And here's the thing about that look on her face, I've thought about it 100 times since. It wasn't hurt exactly. It was something closer to shock. The particular shock of a woman who asked for distance and got it so completely she didn't recognize what losing it actually felt like. I said, "Good morning." She said nothing. I picked up my coffee, my phone, my keys, and I drove to work. But I kept thinking about that hotel charge. $214. A Marriott in the Galleria. A Friday night I was out of town. I hadn't run the numbers yet. But I was about to. I was sound asleep, maybe an hour in, when I heard it. A small sound. Barely there. Like something soft being pushed across the floor. I sat up. Looked at the bottom of the door. There was a folded piece of paper on the floor just inside the room. I got up slowly. Picked it up. Unfolded it. Alia's handwriting. Careful. Deliberate. The way she wrote when something mattered. "Daddy, I know something is wrong." I heard the man's voice on Mommy's phone. She didn't know I was in the hallway. She was laughing different. "I don't know what it means, but I thought you should know because you tell me we should always tell the truth to the people we love. I love you, Daddy. Don't leave. Lexi." We call her Lexi sometimes. Her little nickname. She signed it Lexi. I want to pause here, because this is the moment that broke me open in a way that everything else hadn't. Not the hotel charge. Not the guest room. Not even Diane's face that morning. It was this. My 10-year-old daughter, awake at 2 a.m., carrying something she didn't fully understand, choosing truth over comfort because I had taught her to. And here's what that told me. Children don't lie about the things that frighten them. They report exactly what they see. No agenda. No spin. Just what happened. She had heard a man's voice. She had seen her mother laugh differently. Sometimes the clearest witness in a house is the one everybody assumes isn't paying attention. I walked to her room. She was in bed, eyes open, watching for me. I sat on the edge of her bed and said, "Thank you for trusting me, baby." She said, "Are you going to leave, Daddy?" I smoothed her hair back. "Go to sleep." I didn't answer her question. because I didn't have the answer yet. What I had was a note, a hotel charge, a wife who sent me to the guest room, and a name I was already beginning to piece together. I went back to the guest room. I didn't sleep again. I sat at the desk with my laptop open and the joint bank account loading, and before I looked at anything, I told myself, stay calm. Whatever you find, stay calm. Because I knew that the moment I moved on emotion, I would lose every advantage I had. The first charge I had already noticed. $214. Marriott, Galleria area. A Friday night I was in Dallas for a conference. Diane told me she'd stayed home with Aliyah that weekend. I scrolled back further. Another charge. 6 weeks earlier. Different hotel. $178. Same part of town. Another Friday. I had worked late that night. Got home around 10. Diane was already in bed. Said she was tired. I kept scrolling. And this is the part that I think most people don't fully appreciate about betrayal. It's rarely one big thing. It's 14 small things across 8 months, each one just ordinary enough to explain away on its own. 14 charges. 8 months. Always when I was traveling or working late. Never flashy. Never obvious. Just consistent enough to be invisible unless you were looking. I opened a document. Wrote down every date, every amount, every hotel name. Column by column. My mother used to say, always keep records, Marcus, because someday you'll need to show somebody exactly what happened. I cross-referenced 3 dates with my phone's location history. On every one of those nights, I was nowhere near those hotels. I closed the laptop. Sat in the dark. Then I called Jerome. I need you to do something, I said. Don't ask questions until I'm done talking. Jerome said, talk. That call lasted 40 minutes. By the end of it, I wasn't just a husband with a suspicion. I was a man with a paper trail. And I knew exactly what came next. It was past midnight on a Wednesday when the house phone rang. The landline, the one we kept because Diane's mother refused to call cell phones. I was the only one awake, so I answered. Dillon residence. 4 seconds of silence. Then a click. I set the phone down carefully. Looked at it. Then I picked it back up and pressed *69. I didn't recognize the number. I wrote it on the notepad I'd started keeping on my nightstand, same notepad with the hotel charges, the dates, the amounts. In the morning, I ran it. Reverse lookup service Jerome had found. 20 minutes later, the number came back registered to a business account. A man named Derek Okafor. Licensed sales consultant. Houston area. I knew that name. I had shaken that man's hand. 14 months ago at a birthday dinner. He'd handed me a business card. Smiled. Called himself an old college friend of Diane's. I had looked him in the eye, the way men assess each other without a word being spoken, and I had thought, he's not a threat. I want to be honest with you right now, that moment haunted me. Not because I missed something obvious, but because I had trusted my instincts and my instincts had trusted Diane. And she had made him a threat anyway. Here's what I've learned about situations like this. The danger was never really Derek. The danger was the door that got left open. And doors don't open themselves. I drove to work early. Sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes. I was not going to move on emotion. My father had done that his entire life. Every bad decision he ever made came from his chest, not his head. I was going to move on information. On documentation. On a plan. But first, I needed to know exactly how far this had gone. It was a Thursday evening. Diane had cooked, first time in weeks. Baked chicken, rice, green beans. Aliyah set the table without being asked. The 3 of us sat down together like a family. I said grace. I filled my plate. I ate. Diane watched me from across the table. I could feel the weight of it, that specific pressure of someone staring at you, waiting for you to give them something to react to. A question. An accusation. Anything she could shape into whatever she needed it to be. I gave her nothing. I talked to Aliyah. Asked about school. Asked about violin. Laughed at her story about her teacher falling asleep at lunch. I was fully present, just not for Diane. And I want you to understand something about that choice, because some people hear this and think it's cold. It wasn't cold. It was the most intentional thing I did in that entire season. When someone is waiting for your emotion, withholding it isn't cruelty. It's clarity. It forces them to sit with their own conscience instead of managing yours. By the time Aliyah carried her plate to the sink and disappeared upstairs, the kitchen went quiet. Diane said, Marcus. I looked up. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Her eyes filled and she looked away fast, like she was wrestling something back down. Then the tears came. Slow. Quiet. The kind a woman cries when she's not yet sure she deserves comfort. I watched her. And I want to be honest, it cost me something. She was still the woman from the church picnic. Still the woman who laughed when she reached for that last piece of cornbread. Some part of me never stopped loving her, even in the middle of all of it. But I had a notepad upstairs with 14 hotel charges and a midnight phone call on it. I passed her the napkin holder. "You should eat before it gets cold," I said. And I finished my plate. Miss Patricia called on a Friday afternoon. My lunch break. I almost didn't answer, not because I didn't respect her, but because I didn't know how much she knew yet, and I wasn't ready to hold a conversation and manage my composure at the same time. I answered anyway. She skipped the small talk entirely. "Marcus, baby, she's about to lose you and she has no idea." I didn't say anything right away. Just sat with it. "Miss Patricia." "Don't," she said. "Don't protect her from this conversation. I'm her mother. I know exactly what she's doing. I watched myself do it 30 years ago and it cost me the best man I ever had." Her voice was steady, but I could hear the weight sitting underneath every word. "I taught her this," she said. "Not on purpose. But I taught her. My mother taught me to go cold when I felt unheard. I taught Diane. And now she's using distance like a weapon on a man who doesn't deserve it." I looked out the windshield at the parking lot. People walking in and out of a sandwich shop. Ordinary life moving in every direction around me while mine was quietly coming apart. "What do you want me to do with this, Miss Patricia?" "Nothing," she said. "I just needed you to know that you are not crazy. You are not overreacting. And whatever you decide, nobody in this family has the right to judge you for it." And here's the thing about that phone call that I've thought about ever since. A mother calling her son-in-law in secret to tell him he's not crazy is not a small thing. That is a woman carrying real guilt. That is someone who has looked at her own reflection in her daughter's choices and didn't look away. We said goodbye. I sat in the car a long while. Then I called my attorney. My attorney's name is Bernard Cole. We went to college together. He's handled my legal work for 6 years. Quiet, precise, doesn't ask more than he needs to. I sat across from him and told him what I wanted. He listened. Made notes. Asked 2 questions. Then leaned back and said, "You sure about this?" "I'm sure. Most men come in here wanting divorce papers." "I'm not most men." What I had Bernard prepare was not divorce papers. It was a formal asset protection restructuring for Third Ward Holdings, the real estate LLC I had been quietly building for 14 months with my 2 oldest friends, Jerome and Calvin. 4 properties across the Houston metro. A 5th under contract in Pearland, 3 miles from my house. Diane didn't know any of it existed. I needed Bernard to establish those assets clearly as separate property, documented, dated, legally airtight, before any proceeding could touch them. Because whether I chose to leave or stay, I was not going to let what I had built get dismantled in the process. And then I did one more thing. I had Bernard send a brief formal letter to Derek Okafor's business address. No accusations. No threats. Just notification that Marcus Dillon was aware of his contact with Diane Dillon, and that any further communication should go through legal counsel. Derek's business partner called Bernard's office the next day in a panic. I never heard from Derek Okafor again. And here's what I noticed the following week: the hotel charges stopped. Diane's phone, which she used to carry everywhere like a lifeline, started sitting on the kitchen counter every evening. I said nothing. I observed everything. Sometimes the most powerful move a man can make isn't confrontation. It's documentation. It's patience. It's letting the pressure of being known do the work for you. It was a Saturday night, maybe 3 weeks into all of it, when I heard her footsteps in the hall. I knew them. 6 years of marriage teaches you the specific sounds of a person, the rhythm of their walk, which floorboards they avoid. I heard her come down the hallway and stop outside the guest room door. I heard her hand touch the knob. Then nothing. She didn't knock. She didn't open it. She just stood there. On the other side of a door she had put between us herself. I had been awake. I made myself still. Slowed my breathing. And I lay there in the dark listening to my wife stand in the hallway at 3 in the morning, holding whatever she came to say behind her teeth. I don't know how long she stood there. Long enough that I started counting my own heartbeats just to keep from moving. Then her footsteps retreated. Slowly. Back down the hall. The bedroom door closed. I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling. And I want to be honest with you here, because this is the part one thing gets lost in stories like this, where the wrong person gets painted as invincible. That moment cost me. Genuinely. My wife, alone in a hallway at 3 in the morning, whatever she needed to say dissolving before she could say it, that is not a triumphant feeling. That is grief dressed up as strength. But I had already stood at a door. In every way that counted, I had been the one knocking, patient, present, steady, and she had responded by sending me down the hall and turning toward someone else. I had already paid the price of that door. She hadn't paid anything yet. I closed my eyes. I did not sleep. But I did not open that door. Diane found out about Third Ward Holdings on a Wednesday. Not from me. Jerome mentioned it at a church function to his cousin. His cousin mentioned it to a friend. That friend worked with a woman in Diane's office. By Wednesday evening, my wife knew. She came home while I was at the kitchen table reviewing property documents. She set her bag down, stood across from me, and her face, I want to describe it accurately because it matters, her face was the face of a woman who had just discovered that the man she thought she had fully accounted for had been operating on an entirely different level the whole time. Third Ward Holdings, she said. Yes. That's yours? Mine, Jerome's, and Calvin's. Yes. She sat down slowly. How long? 14 months. Something shifted in her expression. I watched her do the math in real time. 14 months, what that overlapped with, what it meant about the version of our marriage she thought she'd been living inside. You never told me. No. I wasn't ready. Marcus, her voice broke slightly. We have 4 properties. 5th closes in 3 weeks. In Pearland. 3 miles from here. She looked at the table. Then her hands. Then me. And for the first time in months, I saw something in her eyes that wasn't strategy. It was rawer than that. It was the look of a woman understanding, maybe for the first time, what she had been gambling with. She said quietly, "What did I do?" She wasn't asking about the properties anymore. I folded the document in front of me. Kept my voice even. I think that's something you need to spend some honest time with yourself about. Then I walked back to the guest room and left her sitting at the table with all of it. It was a Sunday morning when Diane asked if we could all sit down together. I said yes. Aliyah sat in the armchair, pulling her sleeves over her hands the way she does when she's nervous. Josiah, our 5-year-old, sat on the floor with a toy car, completely unbothered, which was its own kind of mercy. Diane sat on the couch across from me. And then, without warning, without drama, she slid off the couch and lowered herself onto both knees on the living room floor. Aliyah made a small sound. Diane's voice was steady but her hands were shaking. I was wrong, she said. I let someone make me feel seen in a way I should have only been finding inside this family. I convinced myself it was harmless. I let it go further than it should have. And I made you feel like you weren't enough, so I didn't have to face what I was actually doing. She was looking directly at me. I'm sorry. Genuinely. I don't expect anything back right now. I just needed you to hear me say it out loud. And here's my honest reflection on that moment, because I think it's important. An apology on both knees is significant. But it is not currency. It doesn't automatically buy back what was spent. What it does, if it's real, is open a door. And the question isn't whether the door opens. The question is whether what's on the other side is worth walking through. Aliyah had tears streaming down her face. I stood up, crossed the room, reached down and held out my hand. She took it. I helped her up, pulled Aliyah close. Josiah climbed into his mother's lap without understanding anything and understanding everything all at once. We sat there in all of our mess. And I had already made my decision. Here is what everyone expected me to do. Leave. Jerome expected it. My attorney expected it. Miss Patricia, I believe, expected it and would not have blamed me for a single second. Here is what I did instead. I went back to the guest room that evening and I sat with everything. My Bible, my notepad, the note Aliyah had slipped under my door, and I thought about my father. A man who left without a conversation. Without a chance given. Without even the dignity of a real goodbye. I thought about what his absence carved into me, a man who would not beg. Would not collapse. Would not let anyone see him break. All of that was necessary. All of that protected me through this. But I also thought about what he took when he left. The possibility that something broken, if 2 people are willing, can be rebuilt into something stronger than it ever was before the crack. Not every situation. I want to be clear about that. Not even most. But this one, With a daughter's note in my drawer, a mother-in-law's voice on the phone, and a wife on her knees on the carpet, this one I was not willing to walk away from without first seeing what it could become if I chose it. Deliberately. Eyes completely open. So 41 days after Diane told me she needed her space, on a quiet Thursday evening, I carried my things back down the hall. No announcement. I set my watch on the nightstand, hung my shirts, put my mother's photo back where it belonged. Diane stood in the doorway watching. Her eyes were full. "We do this right or not at all," I said. "Counseling. Honesty. Everything on the table. If you mean what you said Sunday, show me." "I mean it," she said. "Then we start tomorrow." Third Ward Holdings closed on the fifth property 4 days later. I took Diane to see it on a Saturday. We walked through the empty rooms together, Aliyah between us holding both our hands. I watched my wife look at what I had been building quietly in the dark, for this family, for this future, and I watched her understand, fully, what she had almost thrown away. What grew back in that house was slow, imperfect, hard-earned through counseling sessions and heavy conversations and nights where forgiveness felt less like a feeling and more like a choice I had to make all over again. But it was real. For the first time in our marriage, it was actually real. And my mother, who ironed her uniform every morning and kept the lights on and never once let us see her break, I think she would have understood exactly why I stayed.